Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Happy to have you with us. Connor Riley stops by today, a part of a big, fun, loaded show for us. And we'll tell you this, if you want to skip out to the end here, normally we have pretty long R.S. Andrews cooldown where we take comments and kind of chat. Today, we actually have a pretty big day around Dog Nation. Busy. We're having a lot of meetings, things like that. We don't do a lot of corporate meeting type stuff around here, but we do have to do some of that today. So we're going to get off the air relatively early compared to what we normally do for our R.S. Andrews cool down a little bit later on. So I might try to make the show a little quicker today to save some room for some comments. So just keep in mind there on that. We're going to try to keep a pace going today as a way of leaving some time for comments at the end, because I do have a pretty hard out, as we say in the business, and by the business, I mean the industry. We'll do that here coming up in just a little bit, so heads up about all that. But prior to that, big show. Told you, Connor's a part of the show. Interesting look back from Kirby Smart on how it all started for him at Georgia. It's kind of a fun thing to do. We're going to have some fun with that on the basis of an interview that Kirby Smart recently did that I thought was really, really good. And couple of key updates as it relates to Georgia's 2024 recruiting class. We're going to get ready to do all of that here right now. So what do you say we start it off that way? And glad to have you with us as we do. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm going to begin by telling you something you already know. There is a lot going on with Georgia's recruiting class right now. The 2024 recruiting cycle, we kind of knew as you got to late spring, early summer, that things would be really heating up. And here we are kind of in that moment, in that time, and that is clearly happening right now. So yesterday, off the top of our program, we spent a good bit of time kind of chatting about Chauncey Bowens, the running back that Georgia flipped away from Florida. Always fun to do that. Georgia got a chance to do that over the weekend with Bowens. A really nice video that's kind of all over the internet if you haven't seen it, of the moment in which Bowens kind of told everybody there in Athens, I'm ready to be a part of this class. It was that great moment that you sort of live for if you follow Georgia recruiting and things like that. And just kind of a nice to see a guy like that so happy about the choice that he made. And we spent some time yesterday sort of talking about that, and that was a lot of fun. But Georgia fans are always thinking about what's next, what's going to be next as it relates to Georgia recruiting. And pretty clearly there are some nexts in store here for Georgia right now, both maybe some good news and maybe some not quite so good news. So I want to take a moment here to kind of deal with some of this here just right now of, okay, so where do things stand with the Georgia recruiting class right now? What is on the horizon? What's good news that you should be aware of? What's maybe not quite as good a news you maybe hoped it should have been, but it's still important to point out. So let me try to frame this way right now. Here are kind of, I think, three important takeaways for where things stand with Georgia's 2024 recruiting class after another busy weekend here in the month of June, and with some more kind of stuff still left to come in the next few days. Let me start with the good news here. So Georgia pretty clearly saw some fruit from this past weekend with the Bowens commitment, but it certainly seems like that might not be the only good news that we see from Georgia. There is certainly a possibility that there's more movement afoot here, and a lot of the genesis, the origin story for a lot of what I'm talking to you about right now kind of goes back to a story that Jeff Sentell has written at DawgNation.com, and I want you to go check this out. Jeff had his takeaways up at DawgNation.com of the recruiting weekend, the guys that visited, and kind of what comes next on that. And so in perusing what Jeff wrote, it kind of has framed my thinking here a little bit, and that's kind of guide us over the course of the next couple of minutes. And there's one photo from this past weekend that I can't quite get out of my head, which is Bowens, who commits to Georgia, obviously feeling good about that, flipping away from the Gators and doing so, seeing the light in that process. There was one photo that got a lot of attention of Bowens here this week, standing with another running back. In fact, I think we may have this be able to show to you right now. Yeah, so here's Bowens along with Dale McGee. And doesn't Dale McGee look, for those of you watching on video, doesn't he look awesome in this photo? He almost looks like the heel wrestling manager or something like that. He's got the sport coat on, the black dress shirt underneath, sitting down, relaxed, two fingers in the air pointing to two national championship trophies and two very good running backs holding both of those trophies right now. One of those obviously being Chauncey Bowens, who we talked about, the other being Nate Frazier. Frazier, a very interesting running back out of the state of California. And it sounds like Georgia may have its sights set on Frazier. Frazier may have his sights set on Georgia, much the same way that Chauncey Bowens just did. So you're looking at what could potentially be a very intriguing stable of running backs for Georgia here in this class, with Dwight Phillips, the speedster from in-state, already in the fold. Chauncey Bowens, who made his pledge public here this weekend, flipping away from Florida, and now a pretty big spotlight on Nate Frazier moving forward. If you read Jeff Sintel's story from yesterday at DawgNation.com, you see Frazier featured pretty prominently in that text. And so if you're kind of thinking, well, what's next for Georgia recruiting here? The presence of Nate Frazier and the attention on him, and does he kind of make good on this picture standing there with Dale McGee and Chauncey Bowens? Does he make good on all of that and eventually join in this 2024 class? That could be an interesting thing to see. Something else that Jeff Sintel wrote, and this is why you should be reading DawgNation.com each and every day, Jeff gave you a pretty big spotlight on Jordan Thomas yesterday, defensive lineman out of the state of New Jersey. It seems like for Georgia right now that there's a lot of attention on Thomas. Thomas is supposed to take a visit to Michigan this weekend. It'll be interesting to see if he actually does that, just given all the buzz, all the chatter that exists around him with Georgia here right now. So if you're kind of that Georgia fan after a big commitment, Chauncey Bowens, where you're like, okay, what's next? Who's next? Who's the next name to look at? It certainly seems like if you read Jeff Sintel closely at DawgNation.com, a Jordan Thomas defensive lineman out of New Jersey, a Nate Frazier running back out of California, seems like those might be the names to pay attention to here right now. So that's good news for Georgia on the heels of the Chauncey Bowens commitment over the course of the weekend. But around here, we also try to be fair and balanced and give you both sides of all of this kind of stuff when we possibly can. And it certainly seems like the thought that we had going into the recruiting weekend for Georgia was probably reinforced in some respects, at least about a couple of guys it seemed like Georgia had a lot of ground to potentially make up with, and in all likelihood would not be able to close the gap enough to make a difference in the ultimate decision that was made. One of those guys, Mike Matthews, the wide receiver. You think about Edric Houston, the defensive lineman out of Buford. And in fact, let me give you some context here. Speaking of Jeff Sintel, who wrote a great story at DawgNation.com, Jeff on his own program last week before the Hedges presented by Kroger was talking about some of those guys that Georgia was likely to host and the fact that right now it wasn't looking great for Georgia with some of those players necessarily, including Mike Matthews, who I think is just a dazzling prospect, so entertaining to watch, the five-star receiver out of Parkview. This is what Jeff said about the Matthews recruitment going into last weekend, and this is one of those honesty compels you to admit type situations, but first some context from Jeff on where things were with Matthews going into the weekend.
Mike Matthews, terrific football player. Going to be an all-SEC, all-American wide receiver. I don't know how well-positioned Georgia is right now for Mike Matthews going into that official visit. When I mean well-positioned, I don't think Georgia is the team to beat, or he's even the 1A, 1B team to beat right there. I think Clemson, who he just took an official visit with, is big. I think Tennessee is big. I think a lot of schools are going to catch the attention of Mike Matthews.
So that's Jeff Sintel there on the idea of Mike Matthews. Hey, maybe not in the world's greatest shape for him. And it seems like, once again, kind of ear to the ground, reading the tea leaves, reading specifically Jeff Sintel, it seems like that things maybe didn't change all that much for Mike Matthews over the course of this weekend. Probably the same thing is true for Edric Houston, and I hate that. Houston's a player that I really like from Buford. He's that guy that just sort of reminds me of a Trayvon Walker, sort of feels like he would be a perfect fit for what Georgia does defensively, but it sounds like Houston sort of sees himself as maybe a better fit somewhere else, possibly Ohio State, I guess. But it sounds like, based on what Jeff Sintel has said, it sounds like that the needle wasn't really moved for Mike Matthews, and the needle wasn't really moved for Edric Houston all that much. So you got to be honest about that. One more thing in the sort of honesty compels you to admit category, sometimes the dog that isn't barking is something worth paying attention to. And if you go and look at what Jeff wrote, kind of recapping the recruiting weekend that was for Georgia in terms of kind of next moves, what's happening here, there's one name that you don't really seem to see a lot of chatter with Georgia about here right now. Not sure what that means, not sure where you go with all of this. But right now, it's interesting that when you're talking about, Stacey Searles' priorities and what Georgia's doing from an offensive line standpoint, and Jeff wrote a lot about that. The one name you sort of didn't really see a lot right now is Daniel Calhoun, I would say, big-time prospect from the Walton program here in the Atlanta area. There's been some chatter about Calhoun potentially other places, and in terms of the most recent assessment of the Georgia offensive line and Stacey Searles, it doesn't really seem like Calhoun is as mentioned as prominently in that discussion right now as I sort of thought that it would be. So obviously Edric Houston, it seems like he's likely to go somewhere else. Mike Matthews right now, as we said, sort of seems like he's likely to go somewhere else. Daniel Calhoun, that deep, rich connection to Georgia, sounds like right now there's some work that would need to be done in order for that to be the case. But it certainly seems like, once again, to kind of circle back to the story that Jeff wrote, that there is attention right now on what Stacey Searles can do with the offensive line. If you're looking for some of those, what's next type situations, you're watching for Jordan Thomas on the defensive line. You're watching for a Nate Frazier at the running back spot. And it seems like that certainly Stacey Searles and this Georgia recruiting machine did make some impressions on some offensive linemen here this week. So kind of a quick takeaway on the full story for the Georgia 2024 recruiting class right now. For the good news, sounds like there could be some more commits on the way here very soon. Guys like Jordan Thomas and Nate Frazier would be names you would watch specifically there. For the bad news, the sort of Hail Mary attempt at a guy like a Mike Matthews or a guy like an Edric Houston, it seems like that's going to be left lacking. It seems like Georgia did not quite figure out, or should say, did not quite, make that connection with the Matthews or a Houston the way that they would have needed to really kind of change the overall fortunes of that recruiting. It seems like those two guys are likely destined to go somewhere else right now. And we could see some real movement with Georgia offensive line recruiting here in the very near future, as it sounds like there's a lot of irons in the fire as we kind of try to figure out what that 2024 unit's going to look like. So, hey, it's a busy time. There's a lot going on, a lot of rumors about silent commitment this and silent commitment that and who's next and what's going on. Pretty clearly there's a lot of energy around all this right now, and Georgia's going to get a lot of the players that it wants. You can't get them all. Even Georgia can't do that, but certainly plenty of elite prospects. Sooner rather than later, we could be hearing a lot more about more guys joining in on this class of 2024 for UGA. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, we start at 9:45 on our First and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Happy to have you joining us, whichever video platform you choose to use there. Thanks for that. Or radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just very happy to have you as a part of our program here today. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, longtime friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily, and also proud partners of UGA there as well. And I always love those folks who've been with us for as long as they've been with us, great, loyal supporters of ours. I love our relationship with Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and I'm proud to tell their story in our program each and every day there as well, or each and every week, I should say, because of their longtime support for UGA too. It's just fun to do business with those that support the Dogs, and I'm all about that when it comes to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Plus, as a homeowner, there are a lot of things that ESOG can do for you that you got to be aware of there as well, because the signs of maybe needing Engineered Solutions of Georgia to come out and pay a visit to your house, those are the types of things that you ought to be able to notice. For instance, if you're in the house and you see that sheetrock and you see kind of that 45-degree angle kind of crack there, when you see something like that, I want you to, when you see that, I want it to be a trigger in your mind that BA said that might be a reason to call Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Or you kind of look at your brick on the outside of the house. You see sort of those like stair step cracks where it kind of, goes through like the masonry, I guess you'd call it. And you kind of see those stair step looking cracks. Once again, that's maybe a sign of a settlement issue, a sign of a foundation type issue that our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia need to see about. And if you've got that water coming into the basement, that's the type of thing that you want to get seen about right away. And oftentimes, these fixes, these problems are not nearly as hard to fix as you might imagine, especially for a solutions-based company like Engineered Solutions of Georgia, which is what they are. They can provide that kind of work for you. They got an entire team of engineers on staff. that can be put to work, dedicated to solving your problem. There's really nobody else in our marketplace that has that level of resource ready to work for you and solve your problems related to foundation waterproofing issues. But that is what they're all about. They also have a fully transferable triple protection warranty on materials, installation, and design. So that is what our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia are all about. So make sure you give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. That'll get you in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, it's going to be Connor Riley. We'll talk some Georgia football with him. I'll also give you an update on a great giveaway that we're doing right now. Wonderful contest promotion we have courtesy of our friends at Traeger Grills and Kroger. We'll do an update on that here coming up in just a couple of minutes. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse here for a moment. And there's a recent interview that Kirby Smart did with a podcast, a little bit of a different type of thing that we normally hear from Kirby Smart. And I think it's really interesting. It's called The Growth Project. And I guess the guy that runs The Growth Project is a guy that's sort of done some work with the Georgia program, sort of that business coaching or mindset, coaching type stuff. And so that's the relationship that Kirby Smart has with the guy that does the show. I'm going to put a link to the podcast when I post the show at DawgNation.com a little bit later on, because I honestly think if you're a Georgia fan or if you're just sort of interested in like human achievement, an interview like this is probably worth your time. I do think it's really interesting. I'll probably, over the course of the next couple of days, I may end up playing a couple of clips from this, but I want you to make sure you hear the full interview because I think it's that much worth your time to be able to do so. But around the doghouse here for a moment, I wanted to kind of highlight one thing in particular for today, and it's kind of funny. Here we are sitting here in summer of 2023. It starts to feel like that summer of 2016, prior to the start of the Kirby Smart era. All of that starts to feel like a long time ago now. You sort of blink your eyes, you realize how much time has passed, and I guess we're kind of at that point now where the beginning of the Kirby Smart era does sort of start to feel like a little bit of a long time ago. And it's kind of hard to imagine Kirby Smart as that rookie head coach the way that he was then, just given the way that he's kind of grown into the role as UGA coach now. I believe, and I think there's plenty of evidence to support this, that Kirby Smart is currently the best coach in college football. Now, will he ever, rise to the level of being like a Nick Saban, someone you might say is the greatest coach of all time? Well, obviously that remains to be seen. But for the moment, for now, has Kirby Smart overtaken not just Saban, but every other coach in college football? I think you can, for now, say that's the case. But way back in 2016, it was not obvious that we would be heading in this direction, and it certainly was not obvious that we'd be heading this direction quite so quickly. There was clearly optimism about Kirby Smart. No one would deny that. But in terms of being able to guarantee, hey, Kirby Smart's going to take over college football within less than the span of a decade, there just weren't necessarily a lot of people saying that there at that particular time, that Kirby Smart was the guy who had no head coaching experience. And figuring out how he would step into and fill what sort of felt like pretty big shoes for a previous coach like Mark Richt, who had won 10 games with regularity, won a couple of SEC championships. That was all very much a very prominent conversation at the time. So when Kirby Smart was on the Growth Project podcast, he talked about that of, I started my coaching career, he would say, at Valdosta State, going to bounce around here, bounce around there, finally at Alabama for a good while. And then the chance to become a head coach comes up, and Kirby Smart on this Growth Project interview talked about the process of maybe considering taking other jobs before finally landing at Georgia. This is interesting from Kirby because oftentimes doesn't quite get so introspective and so willing to kind of go back and sort of relive moments from the past. But on the Growth Project podcast, Kirby did. Here he is talking about taking the Georgia job.
Oh, I was ecstatic. I mean, it was one of those moments that you feel like everything you've worked towards in your life is right in front of you. And I can't say that I aspired to be the head coach at Georgia. I aspired to become a head coach. I never had to label Georgia. Like, it never even crossed my mind. I mean, people think that was like targeted. It was never that way for me. It was, I interviewed for Southern Miss. I interviewed for Auburn. I interviewed for jobs while I was in Alabama, and I turned down a lot of interviews for jobs that I was not interested in. I wanted to take a job that I knew I could win at, that was a solid program, no matter what level. Like Southern Miss is a really good football program, and they're competitive in their conference. My designation was, can they win their conference championship? If they can win their conference championship, it's probably a good job. But when the Georgia one came about, it was just like, wow, this is maybe too good to be true. The timing of this, I've waited patiently. I've turned down a lot of good opportunities. Here's a great opportunity. And in the back of your mind, it goes back to that 24-year-old Kirby being defense coordinator. Are you ready? Because you haven't done that yet. You haven't been in that seat yet. And no matter how much preparation you have, how many national championships you have, how many games you've called, there's nothing that can prepare you for that seat other than experience.
I think it's fun and fascinating to hear that from Kirby Smart. And this is one of those sort of like summer days where you kind of have a little bit of time to kind of ponder some of this when in the fall time of year you're sort of busy thinking about the next game, and we have stuff to talk about then that almost doesn't really give us the chance to sort of do some of this the way that we should. But there's a thing in life called fake it till you make it, and almost anyone who's ever successful has a certain period of, hey, I got to fake it until I make it. I don't mean being inauthentic or trying to be something that you're not. I mean trying to kind of live into a role until you finally feel comfortable in that role. That's just, I think, what a part of what life is. And it's interesting to know that, as I mentioned a moment ago, when Kirby first took this job, there were a lot of questions about, hey, is he ready? Can he do this? Can this guy who's never been a head coach before, can he be coach in the University of Georgia? Because let's face it, there's always a hot assistant. Every great coach in any sport at any time, whoever the best coach in that sport is, always has a number of assistants who will be attractive targets for other jobs, but they don't always succeed. It's not a guarantee that just because you hired the guy that has been the top assistant for the top coach, that guy's going to succeed at your program, even if he's an alumnus of that program. No guarantee that's going to be a successful formula. So there were plenty of people at the time asking, can Kirby Smart do this? Is he ready? And it's interesting to hear that moment of vulnerability from Kirby, that moment of honesty from him, where he says, at the same time everyone else was asking, am I ready? Can I do this? Kirby says, I was also asking this of myself. Am I really ready? Am I ready to take on this role, a bigger, larger role than I've ever been in before? And to Kirby's credit, while he was asking that of himself and while he was maybe sort of dealing with some of the self-doubt that you just sort of naturally assume would be a part of all of this, while he was doing all of that, he never really let it show on the outside. He projected a veneer of confidence on the outside while he was questioning himself on the inside. I think that's really fascinating. The other part of that clip that I think is really fascinating there as well is the idea that Kirby pretty clearly had a plan for what he wanted his life to be. He pretty clearly had the idea of the kind of job that would be a good job, the kind of place where you could win a conference championship, the kind of place that gave you a realistic chance at success, saying that, it wasn't necessarily just Georgia or bust for me, because from Kirby's standpoint, just given how much Mark Richt had won, maybe he never reasonably thought the Georgia job might even come available during the span of time in which he was looking to be a head coach. The Kirby had waited and been patient, but I think he also knew you can't wait forever. You eventually have to sort of strike and pick a job and go to work. And I think that Kirby was very close to doing that, and it just so happened the Georgia job sort of fell in his lap and happened to come open, and he got a chance to probably fulfill a dream that he didn't even maybe always even know was even all that realistic. I think that's all really fascinating. And then in terms of kind of moving into the operation of being a head coach for the first time, what Kirby felt confident about, what Kirby sort of was not quite so sure about. Once again, rare moments of real introspection from Kirby about all of this from the Growth Project. Let me let you hear one more clip of Kirby talking about those early days as UGA coach.
The defensive side of the ball, I was very comfortable with. I knew what I wanted. I knew what we wanted to do. I questioned, would I be able to do it and still take that other seat? That was the $1 million question. Are you going to try to spend all your time on defense and not be the head coach you need to be? Or are you going to have somebody that you trust and show confidence in and let them do it? That's the way I ended up going with Mel Tucker, who was incredible because he knew exactly what we wanted. He thought like I thought. He had been with Nick in the same system, so it worked out great to get him. And the second part of that would probably be, I guess, what you were the least confident about. I think at the time I didn't know. I was nervous about getting in front of the team and didn't know exactly how I do. I was like, well, I'll just refer back to my defensive coordinator days, and I was always in front of the defense every day. I had to give a presentation in front of the defense, so that's just doubling the number of people. But it was something about the weight or burden of, okay, the team's looking at you. Like they're counting on you for leadership. Every day they need you to be at your best.
So I think that's good stuff from Kirby Smart, and I want to kind of circle back to the beginning part of that for a moment when he says, the one thing I knew I had my defense, and I knew that I knew the kind of unit I wanted to install and the kind of system we wanted to run. I sort of knew that I had that, and I don't want you to gloss over that. I really don't. Because there's a quote from Bill Belichick that sometimes I think about where he says, like, the thing that people kind of underrated about football is the actual football part, or something along those lines, where he's like, the actual nuts and bolts of coaching football, the actual understanding of football is a really important part of all of this. And I want to make the comparison to Dabo Swinney here for a moment. I'm not trying to take a shot or take a jab or anything like that, but right now we are questioning and wondering, after a couple of national championships, something, by the way, that Kirby Smart just won, we're sort of questioning and wondering, is Dabo Swinney still leading a playoff level, national championship level program at Clemson? Is he still doing that? And we're going to find out here in the 2023 season how true that is, how much of that really is. And if the program has slipped, one of the things that obviously causes Dabo a little bit of issue is he was never a coordinator. He was a wide receivers coach. He's always kind of been sort of the rah-rah culture guy, the kind of guy that sort of creates the right atmosphere for winning. But Dabo's not rolling up his sleeves and providing a lot of, to use the Bill Belichick line again, the actual football part of coaching very much. He wasn't a coordinator, wasn't an offensive coordinator. He's always leaned heavily on like a Brent Venable-style defensive coordinator or a number of offensive coordinators over the years. He's needed those guys to be successful. By comparison, Kirby Smart's always got that component piece, that building block that he can make sure that if worse comes to worse, I know I can roll up my sleeves and coach this defense. I've got the actual football knowledge to be able to do that. I'm not just contributing to culture. I'm not just influencing the mood around the program. I can actually do the actual coaching on that side of the ball if I really need to, and you shouldn't discount the importance of all of that. And then the flip side of that is, if Kirby says, well, I was that confident about my defense, he also knew he had to outsource some of the offensive stuff. And over the years, the hires that Kirby has made have gone a long way towards contributing to that success, starting with a guy like Sam Pittman as your offensive line coach, and then sort of picking an offensive coordinator to work with him, and then eventually making the transition to Todd Monken, knowing that the defensive side of the ball was going to be Kirby's strength, choosing the right guys to have on the other side of the ball, obviously a clear part of why Georgia's had the success that it's had. We'll probably do some more of this growth project stuff here over the course of the next couple of days, but I really would encourage you to go listen to the full podcast because it's about 40 minutes of Kirby Smart in a way that you don't often hear from him. All right, we're going to get Connor Riley here coming up in just a minute. Prior to that, though, let me give you a reminder that we are a few days left in a wonderful contest promotion we've had going on here at DawgNation.com, where someone's going to be a winner of a Traeger Ironwood XL grill and a $500 gift card courtesy of Kroger. Now, here's all you have to do to be the winner. You can go to DawgNation.com. You can upload a photo or a short video, and it's simply a story about someone in your life or someone you've known, whether it be someone from your family's past or someone currently in your community, an American hero. And I'm talking about an average, everyday American hero, someone who's taken that extra step, kind of going above and beyond to make life better for you or people around you or whatever. This is a simple thing where you simply tell that story, and that could make you a winner courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. The Traeger Ironwood XL Grill, that's $2,000 value. The Kroger $500 gift card, great way to make sure you've got food to go on that grill, and use the great Traeger Grills to cook all that up as we head towards the 4th of July and all the fun stuff we have going on here during this summer time of the year. You've got between now and June 17th to get in on this and get your story told so you can be a winner. So make sure you go to DawgNation.com. You can find all the rules and everything else, the details there on that. But the main thing is go there, upload your photo, share your short video, and by doing so, you could be a winner, courtesy of Traeger Grills and Kroger. More on that at DawgNation.com. All right, before we're done here, kind of a nice moment yesterday for a former UGA athlete, kind of putting himself into a little bit of a rare category. We'll celebrate that before we are all said and done. I'm going to make a comparison between Georgia and one of its SEC rivals based on some recent decisions the programs, the athletic departments have made. We'll do that here, there as well. But for now, on everything going on around UGA, including what is next for Georgia recruiting, let's cover all of that with Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So a lot to talk to Connor Riley about. We always enjoy the chance to do that. Connor, it's been a fun time for Georgia recruiting as of late. You got the Chauncey Bowens decision over the weekend, flipping away from the Florida Gators. And one of the things I told our audience yesterday, Connor, is if you're a Georgia fan, you've gotten very used to this lately. You've seen Georgia win a lot of games in the field against Florida. You've seen a lot of recruiting battles go Georgia's way, including some outright flips like Bowens here right now. And to me, this is the kind of thing that UGA fans shouldn't take for granted. You know, Florida is this program's traditional rival, and no matter what form the SEC schedule takes in the future, Georgia's always going to play Florida. So the level of dominance UGA's established over the Gators, Chauncey Bowen's the latest example of that. Boy, that's a valuable commodity, I believe, for Georgia right now. And this past weekend, just the latest example of that.
Yeah, I think Georgia's at a point now where Florida was in the 90s with Steve Spurrier against Georgia, where it just seemed like every year Georgia was going to go name the score, or Florida was going to go name the score and put it on Georgia. And now, to see that flipped, I'm sure, people like you, the chief Gator hanger among us, that's made people pretty happy, and something that I think certainly shouldn't be overlooked, because as, any longtime Georgia fan knows, it has not always been guaranteed this way. Heck, even going back to my time in college, the 2014 and 2015 losses are right up there with some of the worst losses of the past decade that this Georgia program has suffered. So, to go in there, to beat them the manner in which they have in the non-pandemic years, and then to continue to steamroll them in recruiting in a way where Billy Napier was brought in because they thought he was going to make recruiting easier, and when, Florida goes and takes, or when Georgia goes and takes the 5th best Florida prospect, and he now becomes the 12th best prospect in Georgia's class, to quote Charles Barkley or paraphrase him, I don't know much about Billy Napier, but I know Billy Napier is in trouble.
Well, that's the thing, is the fact that you're not talking about a series of failed coaches for Florida if the Napier stuff does not change here pretty soon. The Jim McElwain was supposed to be better than it was. Dan Mullen at one point in time was celebrated as one of college football's top coaches. That seems laughable now. And Billy Napier was supposed to be the retort to that. He was supposed to be, you always seem like you want to go opposite style-wise from your previous coach, and Napier was supposed to be, in some respects, the opposite style-wise to Dan Mullen, and yet thus far, the results look very, very similar. Now, listen, Napier's a sharp guy, talented guy. Maybe he changes that over the course of the next couple of seasons. We'll certainly see. But to me, that's the most poignant part of what Georgia has been doing to Florida. Chauncey Bowen's the latest example of that, is thus far Billy Napier, who was kind of the sort of the hotshot next big thing when hired away from Louisiana Lafayette. Thus far, he has been just sort of powerless to change most of this.
Yeah, I think Billy Napier, at this point, I'm willing to say made sort of a tactical mistake in that, he came in and said, we're going to build this slow, we're going to build this the quote-unquote right way. And the reality is you just can't do that in college football. You need to show immediate process, immediate results. I talked about this on my show on Friday, or on Sunday night, rather. Florida's over-under for the season is 5.5 games. If they go, 5-7, which on Vegas is quite a possibility, especially with the schedule that they play. 2 years in, you've won 11 games. Georgia won 13 games in Kirby Smart's second season. Yeah. So, you've seen quick turnarounds. USC, got to a New Year's Six Bowl last year. TCU got all the way to the national championship year one under a new coach. Brian Kelly made big strides in a program in LSU that I think was in similar disarray when he came in there. And so, this idea that you're going to, make it a slow change and try and do that, especially when you're trying to chase down a behemoth in Georgia, it was a tactical choice that I understand had to be made a certain way given where they were coming out of the Dan Mullen era. But I think we're already starting to see some of the cracks in the foundation that have been laid there. And unless the wheels completely fall off this season and they go 3-9 or 2-10, something like that, Napier's going to get a third year. But there'll be almost no momentum with that, and it'll have been hard to see really any, positive progress 2 years into his regime, which is not what you want to be doing when the team you're most concerned about competing against, Georgia, the team you're going to be playing every year, even in a 16-game SEC, has won back-to-back national championships and is the favorite to do it again in 2023.
So I talked before you joined us about what seems obvious with Georgia recruiting right now. It seems like they are poised to land more commits here very, very soon. You talk about another running back like Nate Frazier to California. It seems like this is sort of an interesting athlete. I would say I'd kind of put him – I'm not saying he's a complete replica of a Dwight Phillips, but it seems like Georgia's kind of valued athleticism in this class with the running back spot. With Dwight Phillips, I would say that Frazier's a little bit like that if he indeed does join up here really soon. Seems like Georgia made some nice strides with Jordan Thomas, defensive lineman out of New Jersey here. So it sounds like Georgia's poised to land more players, and conversely, it sounds like, hey, guys that we sort of thought were a little bit of long shots right now, like the Mike Matthews or the Edric Houstons, even though they're in-state, it sounds like, based on what Jeff Sentell has written at DawgNation.com, that is still just as true as ever. Is that kind of the sense that you get with this class right now, that there are guys about to pop here, there are guys about to make their announcement, but in some respects, some of those big-name in-state guys, they seem like they're kind of heading other places?
Yeah, there's two sort of ways I'm viewing this recruiting class right now. One, the three big positions for me in this class that Georgia had to land and do well in is quarterback, running back, and defensive line. They've absolutely hit it out of the park with quarterback. They were, I think, well on their way to doing it with running back, with the addition of Bowens, with already having Dwight Phillips, and if they land Nate Frazier, that's checked that box there. And then defensive line, obviously they need bodies, but they need talent as well. That's what makes, I think, a guy like Edric Houston so important. And it just sort of seems like he wants to leave the state. And it seems like there are quite a few guys like that. Mike Matthews, it's obviously a very talented crop at the top this year, whereas I would point out it was not this deep a season ago in the 2022 cycle. But Georgia's probably going to end up with the number one recruiting class, and there are also probably going to be people grumbling about how you didn't land five-star Mike Matthews out of Parkview. You didn't land five-star Edric Houston out of Buford there. You didn't land Sammy Brown out of Jefferson. You didn't land Landon Thomas out of Colquitt, or Colquitt, as you like to say. I would just encourage those people to go back and look at the 2021 recruiting class, where Georgia landed two of the top 20 players in the state that year. Tate Ratledge and Broderick Jones. Those were the only two top 20 guys that were in the state. All 20 of those guys were top 200 guys you would have wanted in the Georgia class. Georgia still finished with the number one recruiting class that year, and a lot of the guys they ended up signing, Jalen Carter, Keely Ringo, Darnell Washington, Kendall Milton, those out-of-state recruiting wins just were huge reasons Georgia just won back-to-back national championships. So while we understand that there's an importance and a want from the fan base to see, homegrown talent guys from the state of Georgia, I mean, the reality is Gwinnett is such a transient nature. Gwinnett County, Fulton County, you could say Cobb County as well. These guys don't grow up Georgia fans, whereas you look at some of the other parts of the state where, you think Trayvon Walker from Thomaston, Georgia. You think like Shmal Munden out from Balding. Those areas of the state, it is just a little bit different, and I think it does in those aspects mean more for those guys to come play for Georgia.
I want to shift gears here. You've written a couple of very interesting stories as of late about the Georgia defense. And, Connor, I'll tell you, I'm very high on this Georgia defense here this year. I realize Jalen Carter isn't here anymore, and you're still talking about 5 first-round picks lost off the 2021 defense. But I get the sense this 2023 unit has a chance to really craft an identity of its own. Sounds like ESPN is touting them as of late. I think that's rightly so. There's still some unanswered questions, I would say. Still some things we need to figure out, and some of that requires guys stepping up and stepping into a bigger role here. But, boy, I really like the potential of what I think this Georgia defense could be. In fact, not hard for me to imagine that this year's unit completely outpaces what the 2022 defense proved capable of doing. What's your outlook for the Georgia defense here right now?
Yeah, I think it's sort of an inverse of where this defense was a season ago, where last year they had the high-end stars, Jalen Carter, Chris Smith, Keely Ringo, I would count in that faction there. But they weren't as experienced, and there were questions about how deep it was in certain spots. Right now, entering this season, you feel good about the depth that they have along the defensive line, at inside linebacker, at cornerback. I think one of the areas for me are who are the guys that go on to become true stars, guys like Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, guys not just Georgia fans know, but the entire country knows. They know that they are the best players in the country at those positions. Can Jamon Dumas-Johnson and Shmal Munden go from nice players that all Georgia fans like and all Georgia fans know are good? Can they do that to where everyone in the nation knows they are that good? Can Michael Williams make a leap to where he is an elite defensive lineman sooner than either like Jalen Carter, Trayvon Walker, Jordan Davis, any of them ever did? Because as talented as he is and as much as he showed as a freshman, those Jalen Carter and Trayvon Walker and Jordan Davis didn't become who they were till year 3, in some cases year 4 in the program. He's only going to be entering his second season. Kamari Lassiter is a guy a lot of people like. Javon Bullard showed some nice things, and Malachi Starks did as well over the course of last season. Can they do that like Chris Smith did over the course of a 15-game season? I think those are sort of the questions that I have with this defense. And then ultimately the one stat that you sort of keep your eye on, or at least I'm going to judge this defense by, how many points do they give up? They gave up 10 points per game last year, or in the 2021 defense. It was, a big reason why they're the number one defense that season. Last year that went up to 14 points per game, and that was good for 5th in the country. And if you remove the 2 college football playoff games, Georgia would have led the country in points per game allowed. So, that's sort of the standard that which they are now judged at, where you're giving up less than 2 touchdowns a game. Can you do that? Can you, get that closer to a touchdown and a field goal rather than just 2 touchdowns? it's certainly on the table, especially with the fact that I don't think they play a lot of great offenses this season, but they're ultimately going to have to go out there and actually do it.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel between Georgia in 2021 and Georgia in 2022 from this respect, that both those units kind of showed you that no matter how great you are against a great offense, it can still be hard to truly limit those teams. You know, Georgia had its issues against Alabama in the SEC Championship in 2021, had its issues against Ohio State in the national semifinal in 2022, but there were also instances in which Georgia did shut down truly great offenses in both those seasons. National championship against Alabama in 2021. I would say the Tennessee game in November, where Georgia completely rendered any chance they had of being effective. They just they rendered that an impossibility. And if you're talking about true judgments of the 2023 defense, that's also what it's going to come down to. I agree. How many points do you allow overall is going to be a big question. But how much do you limit the best offenses that you play when you eventually do play them, whether it's SEC Championship or Tennessee on the road in November or, whatever comes in the college football playoff? How much can you as a great defense do to limit the great offenses that you eventually do play? That's also going to become the big measuring stick before this season is done as well.
Right. And let's point out here, the number 1 pick in the draft, Bryce Young, and the number 2 pick in this last draft, C.J. Stroud, was really the only quarterback that had significant success against this Georgia defense. And there's a reason those two guys were the first 2 players in the draft. It also helps them, they had what will have been multiple first-round wide receivers. Jamison Williams for Alabama, obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think Emeka Egbuka for Ohio State are going to be that in the 2024 NFL draft. So you need, obviously, the right combination of quarterbacks and wide receivers to do that. I think that's really been the only way you can have a path forward to beating Georgia. They are so dominant against the run, and that's what really I think hurt Tennessee was that they couldn't run the ball at all, and that thus couldn't set up their passing game. You need to have a passing game that can survive on its own, independent of the ability to run the football. Because even Ohio State, they scored 41 points, and they did it mostly without a running game that day. So you need to have, I think, quarterbacks and wide receivers that are able and capable of making plays, even when another area is going to be shut down. Because I think with what you've seen from this Georgia defense, even, with all the turnover they've had in the last 3, 4, 5 years, they've always been elite at stopping the run. That's just always something Georgia, I think, now has definitely earned the benefit of the doubt of. Until you see a team consistently, or a Georgia team consistently give up a big rushing game, you're just going to have to believe that the only way to beat them is to win and succeed while throwing the football.
I want to finish with this topic. You wrote a really good story about Tate Ratledge the other day, and what it kind of reminds me of is we have told the story of Georgia's national championship so much and kind of cited this and cited that as the reasons why the success has taken place. But even with all of that, Connor, I still don't think proper attention has been paid to how good the Georgia offensive lines have been in the last 2 seasons. I think it is far and away the most underrated aspect of Georgia's championship seasons. And I do think that once again you have Georgia set up, I think, based on the way the left tackle competition played out this spring, adding to that, where the Georgia offensive line once again looks like a really potentially dominant strength of this team. Cedric Von Prine coming back is a big part of that. The emergence of Marius Mims is a big part of that. A healthier Tate Ratledge, I think, is a part of that. And I'm excited about what I think this unit can be. And I'm also very optimistic about Georgia overall, just given my belief that a lot of the success that Georgia's had these last couple of seasons has really been pinned on the success the offensive line has had in particular. And it sounds like, kind of the reemergence of Ratledge may be a good sign for this offensive line here again this year.
This offensive line, the 2023 one, has the least amount of questions about it. Just maybe that 2019 offensive line, which, was bookended by Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. He had Solomon Kinley there at guard. You had a lot of talent as well in terms of youngsters, Ben Cleveland, Cade Mays, etc. There aren't a lot of questions about this offensive line, and this was an offensive line a year ago. Look, I know Michigan won the Joe Moore Award, and the people that do that, they do a lot of research and information. They just got that wrong, and that's okay. It happens. But Georgia had the best offensive line in college football last year, and while, yes, they are going to have to replace longtime starters in Broderick Jones and Warren McClendon, you feel great about what you have in Marius Mims, and then, either Austin Blasky or Ernest Green, they're going to have to have earned it. And Georgia feels so good about what they have in that interior of the line there, where it's a strength. In a way, it hasn't been, I think, for the last 2 seasons. Certainly in 2021, that team, I think there were some questions about the guard positions. In the last year, it took a while for Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge to sort of solidify those spots, and I would include Devin Willis there as well. Obviously, he's unfortunately no longer with us. Thoughts and prayers to him and his family. And so the strength that they have in that offensive line, I think it's going to be one of, if not the best position groups in the entire country this year. And when you have guys like Tate Ratledge and Cedric Van Pran, and even Amarius Mims, I would include this because he did start both college football playoff games, they have that championship experience and pedigree. It's going to make a difference, certainly in those big games, especially when, do teams like Ohio State, Alabama, et cetera, do they have the defensive lines to be able to do the things that they need to do to make life difficult for Carson Beck or whoever that Georgia quarterback is going to be? I think with this offensive line, they might just be able to erase some of those questions.
And to finish up here, I think the best example of why the Georgia offensive line has proven to be so important and why I believe it'll be so important again here this year is just look at the transfer portal activity around the offensive line. Connor, this is something we've talked about a lot here on our show, the contrast between Georgia and other programs when it comes to desperation to go out and grab whatever transfer lineman you could get. Look at Ohio State here for a moment. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm not trying to be like anti-Buckeye, whatever else. Ohio State fans will tell you this themselves. They were desperate for offensive linemen in the winter version of the transfer portal, and they weren't there. And they were desperate again in sort of the springtime version of this. They finally grabbed one. But the idea of getting the elite offensive tackle out of the transfer portal, it is basically an impossibility. Ohio State desperately needed to do it, and they kind of really weren't able to. In the SEC, and I'm not trying to be funny. We saw Auburn go out and get an offensive lineman from Tulsa, and that was supposed to be kind of a big move for them. Florida brought in an offensive lineman, I think, from FIU. The transfer portal shows you the value of offensive linemen from the standpoint that the sort of ready-made starter that you can kind of pull from somebody else and plug onto your roster, that it probably exists less with offensive linemen in the portal than any other position. And the fact that Georgia right now has at least 3 offensive tackles they feel good about, the emergence of Monroe Freeling may give them a 4th. I think that's the number one separation between Georgia and its chief competition is the level of depth that it has along the offensive line. Quality starters that it trusts, certainly. But better depth than anybody else, that to me is the real difference maker right now.
Yeah, we're still in the early stages of the transfer portal and seeing, some long-term trends and things like that. I think it's very clear it's very hard to find elite difference-making, either offensive linemen and defensive linemen. And to sort of tie this all into what we started with, that's why Georgia recruits as well as it does. And it hammers that offensive line and defensive line position. We've talked so much here about guys, that are going to start and play big roles for this team. Auburn would kill to have Dylan Fairchild. Florida would be doing backflips if they could get Micah Morris. And those are guys that are going to struggle to see the field this year. Ohio State would probably love to have Jared Wilson on their roster. And those are guys that aren't going to play a big role, but Georgia not only has been able to develop them and land them as recruits, but keep them in the program and develop them to a point where, they're in a spot where where you see like an Austin Blasky who's entering his 4th year in the program and is a guy that is going to play a significant role, whether that is as a starting left tackle or not, we'll see. But he's going to play a lot of snaps for this team this year. And so the fact that Georgia is not only landing those guys as recruits, but now keeping them in the program to where Georgia, depth has never been a position of concern when it comes to that offensive line there. I think that further illustrates, as you pointed out, why Georgia has been a national champion in the last few years, because they have had injuries on the offensive line, and it just hasn't seemed to matter. Warren McClendon started 37 straight games. For it to lose him for certainly the Ohio State game and then parts of the TCU game, it would have been catastrophic for a lot of teams and a lot of programs. Georgia just simply plugged in Amarius Mims, and it was just fine.
Connor, great stuff. I really appreciate your insight into Georgia football. I love reading what you're writing there at DawgNation.com, and we will look forward to speaking to you again next week here at the same time.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, BN.
Thank you, Connor.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I really do believe that. I think that the offensive line for Georgia has been so important these last couple of years. And so take those 2 points we just made with Connor. Hey, I think that Georgia's going to have the best defense in the country this year. I said that a moment ago. And I just said I think that Georgia's going to have the best offensive line in the country. I think they're set up to be able to do that. Here's what I'm going to tell you, and this is overly simplistic, but sometimes simple points are the most accurate. If you give me the best defense and you give me the best offensive line, I'll take my chances with anything else. I really will. That's been the recipe for Georgia. Best defense, best offensive line. And you can do a lot around those 2 component pieces. So a lot of people are very optimistic about Carson Beck, which I think is fine. Some people have some questions about, hey, new starter, how's that going to work? Put him behind the best offensive line in the country and see what kind of results it produces. Some folks would say, rightly so, we didn't see a lot from the Georgia running backs here this spring. Kendall Milton was banged up. Branson Robinson was banged up. Andrew Paul was still banged up. How good is the Georgia running back situation going to be? Fair question. put those guys behind the best offensive line in the country, and what do you expect to see from them then at that point in time? Having the best offensive line is a luxury. It is an invaluable luxury. Georgia may have it to go along with a great defense. Those could be building blocks again for another very special season here for UGA. Speaking of special times, obviously we had one back in April, all with DawgNation. We went on our second ever cruise with DawgNation. So much fun. And I still think about that all the time, have great memories of that. And it's only a reminder to me how much I'm looking forward to my next Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, because I've got one coming up here in a couple of weekends, taking my family on a cruise, and my full family, my brother and his wife and kids, my mom. Just a really special thing we're going to be able to do together, and I'm just looking forward to it so much. And you guys know by now how much I believe you would also enjoy your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, whether you're taking one for the first time or taking one for the next time. Whatever your story is on this, it's time now to get booked up. And it's not too soon to start thinking about January of 2024 and the debut of Icon of the Seas. What I love about Royal Caribbean is so much, in so many ways, they're kind of redefining what a cruise vacation means, and Icon of the Seas is going to be the next iteration of all this. Now, there's also amazing stuff kind of coming from Royal Caribbean over the course of the next couple of years that I think is going to just sort of blow people's minds in terms of what cruises have been before and what they're about to be, both in terms of what happens on the ship and then the destinations you go to when you arrive in port. I just think that Royal Caribbean's got some great stuff coming up in the future here. But Icon of the Seas is the sort of next big thing to know here for right now. So call Jessica Slater. Let her help you out with all this. Great travel agent, 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147. Jessica's a good friend, so make sure you tell her I said to take good care of you. Give you the best deal, give you the best experience, the best insight on what to do, whether it be Perfect Day Coco-Cay or one of these, whatever your situation is. It's time to get ready to enjoy a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Jessica Slater's a great travel agent. She can help you with all that. So call her, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. She will take care of you here today. All right, let's do a couple of stories here for a moment. One of these I meant to get to yesterday, just didn't really have time. So Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated had a very interesting story the other day looking at the current situation of NIL, and one thing in particular that could cause a little bit of a complication. So what Dellinger writes is that the IRS, that's the Internal Revenue Service, says that nonprofit NIL collectives offering tax deductions could be illegal. Dellinger saying that the IRS chief counsel, that's a lawyer, says that donations made to the 501c3 collectives, quote, are not tax exempt because their benefits are not incidental to exempt purposes. That's a lot of fancy language to say. If you have thought in the past of an NIL donation as a charitable contribution, in most cases you could be very disappointed to find out how not true that is. Now, this complicates what I believe is already a complicated matter. And, we're pro-NIL. We like the idea of players being able to cash in. But the one concern we've expressed many times is, for every 100 stories you hear about NIL demand, players who want to cash in on their name, image, likeness, programs who want to provide that to players as a way of enticing and incentivizing them to come play at whatever school we're talking about, for every 100 stories you seem to hear about NIL demand, it sort of feels like you hear one story about NIL supply. And to me, there's a lot of media outlets out there who've kind of sort of staked their claim on, we're going to cover NIL better than anybody else. But I still sort of feel like no one is covering this aspect of NIL enough. Where is the NIL supply coming from? Where is the money coming from? And if you're a rich guy and you're sort of used to making donations to Big State U in the past to sort of fund the facilities and things like that, and you've been used to them being tax deductible, the idea that now they're saying, well, instead of giving to the weight room so we can build a brand new weight room and put a waterfall in the weight room, why don't you give to the NIL stuff? Oh, yeah, but by the way, what used to be a tax donation, a tax deductible donation to the NIL collective, that's not tax deductible anymore because this is sort of a more for-profit type entity here. That's a lot to swallow for a lot of the big donors who've made a name for themselves by giving to their alma mater in the past. And it just sort of stands to reason that when you don't get tax incentives for giving away that money, there may be less incentive to want to give away some of that money. We talked about this a year ago, even longer than that. For as long as NIL has been in our life, we were kind of warning you that the act of giving to an NIL collective was going to be very different than the act of giving away, things, to the athletic department for the facilities enhancements and things like that. And the difference was not going to be seen as beneficial for the guys and the gals who were kind of giving that money. Here's the next thing that I think is coming, because we told you this was coming a year ago, and now it is. Here's the next thing that I think is coming. We're going to find out that a lot of these NIL collectives are kind of operating like tech startups. They're kind of operating like technology companies. Like if you follow like the streaming wars between like say Netflix and Disney Plus and things like that, what you know is that these big streamers spend big bucks as a way of becoming kind of ubiquitous. If they feel like, well, if we can sort of spend enough, like Netflix puts out like several hundred new shows a year. Disney puts out fewer new shows, but they spend big on those shows. If you ever watch some of those Star Wars things like The Mandalorian, things like that, they're spending big to make these what they think of as very impactful television series that make people want to be subscribers to their streaming service. They are kind of spending at a huge deficit right now because they're just trying to make themselves a part of people's lives. And I think we're going to kind of find out that some of the same stuff has been true for some of these NIL collectives as well. This is just my suspicion. This is just my hunch. But I believe we're going to find out, and eventually over the course of the next year, you're going to hear this, that a lot of collectives are giving out more money than they're taking in. And eventually, as you know, that's going to be a problem. It seems to be a problem for everything except for the government. But eventually, the idea of giving out more money than you take in is going to probably be a problem. And my guess is we're going to hear more about collectives who've done that in the very near future, that they want to establish themselves as a player in the industry. They want to establish themselves as a trusted source for players who want money. And so therefore they're giving a lot out. And in some cases, we're going to find out that some of these collectives are giving out more than they are taking in, which once again sort of circles back to what I said before. We just need more reporting and more understanding about where the supply of NIL money is coming from. If you can't make a donation to an NIL collective and have it be tax deductible, then what does that do to the sort of, supporter, booster? What does that do to him in terms of how much he wants to give to these NIL collectives going forward? And, we've kind of come to grips with the idea that the brand advertisers, the big companies that were really supposed to be the number one source of NIL to begin with, they're just not getting involved for their own reasons, whatever those reasons are. They're just not really doing that in a huge way here right now. So if they're not doing it, then where is the NIL money going to come from? I think those are big questions to be asked moving forward. I'm not anti-NIL. I hope the players get their chance to cash in. But sort of figuring out who's providing the cash for the players to cash in, that's one of those things that I still don't think we've investigated not nearly enough. We had our final two spots in the College World Series filled out last night. Wild ending to the Stanford-Texas game where you hate it for the Texas outfielder, just lost the ball in the lights. I mean, it was a walk-off win for Stanford on one of the strangest sets of circumstances you'll ever see. So Stanford punches its ticket there with its super regional win. Tennessee goes on the road to Southern Miss, and there's so much whining about Tennessee having to be on the road here for this series. Ultimately, they do win the game, and actually, pretty impressive fashion, to be honest with you. I don't like Tennessee baseball. But they were impressive last night, kind of holding off Southern Miss down there in Hattiesburg. So Tennessee joins the rest of the SEC contingent on its way here to the College World Series. So it's been a fun baseball postseason here thus far. College World Series now set. Another SEC team added in on that. We saw that last night. I'll also say this. Today, the new Georgia baseball coach, Wesley Johnson, is going to be introduced to the media. And I think it provides an interesting contrast when another SEC team here has done, where Alabama, obviously, the embarrassment there, where they needed to kind of hire a new full-time baseball coach, and they've done so by bringing Rob Vaughn. Vaughn, most recently, the Maryland coach, has been a regular fixture in the NCAA regionals, been, I think, Big Ten Coach of the Year a couple times here. I don't believe he's made it out of an NCAA regional yet, so it's not a grand slam, no pun intended, successful hire necessarily for Alabama. But this is an experienced head coach. I think it'll be interesting to see how much they're paying Vaughn to leave Maryland to come to Alabama. And it draws a sharp contrast with the Georgia hire of Johnson, who, up until this point in time, has a great reputation in baseball, worked in Major League Baseball, been a very important part of a lot of good teams, including LSU here this year, but up until now has not been a head coach. I think the contrast between what Alabama's doing with Vaughn, what Georgia's doing in Johnson, could be pretty interesting here. And, kind of hearing, what it was about Johnson that drew Georgia to him in comparison to a guy like Vaughn, who's a sitting experienced head coach, that could be an interesting contrast to pay attention to. So we will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And speaking of other sports other than football, which is obviously our main topic here around here, for our Golden Shoe today, we're going to give a shout-out to a former Georgia athlete who put himself in a little bit of a rare category last night. Golden Shoe going out to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a part of the Denver Nuggets NBA championship. Nuggets winning the NBA title for the first time in their franchise history. And for Caldwell-Pope, it becomes his second NBA championship as a player. That means that, according to Georgia Basketball, who put this out on Twitter, KCP now the 33rd player in NBA history to win championships with multiple teams. So very good there for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, a part of a really fun Denver Nuggets team, and a Golden Shoe going out to KCP for winning another NBA title. That is a great thing to be able to see. How about a Gator Hater countdown? Dogs back in Jacksonville, beating up on Florida. 137 days for right now. We love that. We love all of you as well. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. I sort of told some of the folks who were with us at the beginning of the show that we cannot go very long with our comments today because I have a bunch of meeting stuff I have to do. So we're going to take a couple of comments here for a moment, and we'll kind of wrap up after that. We'll try to do more comments tomorrow, but today we're kind of tight on time. So let me start on DawgNation.com because I was a little short with them on the cool down today here, there as well. DT says that KCP's playing the best basketball of his life right now. Yeah, I didn't watch a ton of the game last night, but my understanding is it made a big contribution to that Denver win. This Denver team was fun to watch. It was a fun team and a very deserving NBA champion. And it's great to see Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, such a big part of all of that. Thor Rule says Mike Matthews may want to play basketball at UGA, and it's not a definite miss yet. Yeah, I wouldn't put anything in the definite miss category as of yet. I think all of these teams, programs that sort of tell the guy, oh, yeah, come here, you can also play basketball there as well. I think that's all just totally disingenuous. That if you want to be the kind of player that Georgia needs you to be, you're not going to be able to do that and play basketball as well. And there are a lot of programs who, will tell you everything you want to hear of, oh, yeah, come here and do this and come here and do that. But ultimately, if you want to be the best football player you can be, you need to focus on football. I mean, Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson, those guys are few and far between in terms of being the multi-sport athlete. So I love Mike Matthews. I think he's the most fun player to watch in our state right now. I love him. I don't know that anyone's going to be successful playing two sports right now, though. Thor Rule's also looking at the idea of Justin Scott. Yeah, another big defensive lineman that Georgia certainly seemed to impress with here recently. Let's see what else. BMAC hoping to get Ryan Wingo in the fold for the class of 2024 for Georgia. That would certainly be very good news. Let me go to YouTube for a moment. We'll talk to those folks. And as I said before, we got to be quick today, y'all, and I apologize. We just got a lot going on around here. Roosevelt Grimes asking about Clemson to begin the 2024 season. Yes, that game is still on, going to take place. So for everybody whining and crying about Georgia not playing the big non-conference game this year, Georgia will play the big non-conference game next year against Clemson. So people who kind of complain about Georgia's schedule right now seem to forget that Georgia did play Oregon a year ago and beat them 49-3. So it's not like Georgia hasn't proven itself in non-conference games, of course. But Georgia-Clemson to begin next season, yes, that is still on. Jonathan Aaron asking about Bama going back to a good defense with Kevin Steele as defensive coordinator. Yeah, I think that Steele is probably a fine hire. I do. I think that Steele probably did a pretty good job with the Auburn defense overall. It is not a splashy hire. That's the one thing you have to say there. And I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think a lot of Alabama's chance for success defensively, a lot of that really hinges on what you get out of young players, including a freshman like Caleb Downs, who he may end up being a very good player. But if you're an Alabama fan and you want Alabama to have a truly great defense here this year, getting a lot from Downs seems like it's just an imperative. It really does. Fred Gunn says, I often wonder why in Major League Baseball it's called a manager, but in college it's called a coach. Yeah, that's a good question. And Fred, along those lines, I'm not the world's biggest softball fan. I just don't know a lot about softball. But I did notice the other day the softball coaches don't wear the uniforms, which some people have always said it's weird that baseball coaches and managers wear the uniforms anyway, which I guess to a certain extent it probably is. But I noticed that, like, the Oklahoma softball coach, this great team that just won the national championship again, like, the Oklahoma coach was just dressed like any other coach. Had, like, the collared shirt on. It's a female, I believe. Had the collared shirt on. Had the, just like coaching gear, right? It's like gym shorts and collared shirt. He looked like a football coach at practice or something like that. Whereas I thought, well, so the softball coaches don't wear the uniforms. They don't wear the pants and the button-up jersey. They don't do that. I thought that was kind of interesting. Jerry Dogfan says that Nature Gator wants me to show some Florida love. What does he want some love for? For making the World Series? I guess good for them, I guess. Let's see what else. Howard Eubank says Dogs undefeated in the SEC for 2 years and counting. Yeah, you can't discount that for sure, Howard. You certainly can't. G. Grakes Bama Boy says Saban's still on top with recruiting. He's made a few bonehead hires that set Alabama back. Yeah, it's always funny. There's always a scapegoat among those Alabama assistants anytime something doesn't go well for the Tide. Always interesting to see that. Foster Moss says when they announce the schedules tomorrow night, who do you believe is coming to Athens, Bama or LSU? I hope it's Bama. Yeah, I believe it'll probably be Alabama. Now, would they give Georgia, Alabama, and LSU? I guess anything's possible. But I believe, by the way, it's been a long time since LSU's played in Athens, right? When was the last time LSU played in Athens? Surely not 2013. Has it been that long since LSU was in Athens? Am I forgetting something? I mean, Georgia was there in 2018, but it's been a long time since LSU's been in Athens, right? Is 2013 the last time? That's crazy. Nature Gators, I didn't acknowledge that Florida's going to Omaha. I said that before. They won a great super regional series against South Carolina. Yeah, so LSU has not been to Athens since 2013. That's crazy. Great game, by the way. A historic game, I think, for Sanford Stadium in terms of the way people remember it. But, boy, that's a long time ago. Yeah, so Florida's got a good baseball team. They won a good super regional series. No disputing that. Let me go to Facebook for a moment. I think I probably feel like LSU is probably the best team in the SEC, I believe. I think Wake Forest is going to be tough to beat, though. That Wake Forest team's pretty good. You can ask Alabama that. Sonia Prescott says, I was there. So the game the ref stole from Georgia against LSU would have been 2009, right? That was the A.J. Green game. 2013 was the shootout between Aaron Murray and Zach Mettenberger that Georgia won. So, yes, but I do remember your 2009 game between Georgia and LSU. That was very weird, very weird. But the 2013 game was a Georgia win, and Frank Watts also remembers that shootout. I just can't believe it's been that long. I mean, that's a long time ago. Johnny Prescott says, I'd like to give a shout-out to the SEC baseball color commentators. TV announcers get a lot of grief, but these guys are great and add a lot to the broadcast. Yeah, Benny McDonald is good. The other guy, what's his name? I was listening to him last night. I don't think it was McDonald last night. I think it was other guy, the Ole Miss dude. I think he is. I thought he was really good because, like, a couple of times this sort of super regional, he was kind of talking about a couple of things that I thought really were. I'm trying to think of a specific example. One of the things was, I won't bore you with, nerdy baseball talk, but a couple of things he sort of pointed out were really valuable to me in terms of understanding what was going on. And so it's funny that you bring that up, Johnny, because I actually kind of thought that there as well. The SEC has got a pretty good crop of baseball analysts on TV, I believe. I think you're right about that. Keith Fold says Saban always blames his assistants. It certainly seems like there's a lot of scapegoating that goes on there. Tosh LaPoy, Pete Golding, Bill O'Brien. There's a lot of that goes on. Lane Kiffin, a lot of that goes on. All right, we're going to do 2 more minutes, y'all. We're going to get out of here. Phil Rogers says the SEC needs to go to a 10-game schedule. Matt Rukavina, this is our last season with division. So the last year of the SEC East and West is this year. We don't know a lot about the future of the SEC, but we do know they are doing away with divisions. We do know that. So there you go. Todd Greer says time for Bama and LSU to travel to Athens. For a lot of Georgia fans who've been complaining about the quality of the home schedule, that'd be one way to change all of that. That'd be a big way to change all of that. My guess is we see Georgia get a pretty interesting schedule in 2024. That's my guess. Paul Moon excited about his Deacons in the College World Series. G. Grace Bama Boy on the idea of Georgia having to play Bama, LSU, Florida, Tennessee, and Texas in the same year. I mean, listen, there's going to be times in which, it's going to feel like you got a stacked schedule, but schedules for the most part are going to be more balanced moving forward. And, admittedly, Georgia will be playing a tougher schedule. More years than not, the Georgia schedule moving forward is going to be tougher than it has been. That's just, I think, a fact. But given the way that Georgia's dominated the best teams it has played, I'm not sure that matters. And Howard Eubanks also points out here that when it comes to, crying about scheduling, and Howard brings up a very good point, the only one that's complained about any of this so far is Nick Saban. That's a very good point. Andrew Hughes says Bishop Sycamore's got some good pointers on scheduling. Andrew, that's very funny. Very funny. G. Gray says he saw me clowning Bama baseball. I didn't clown them for being good or bad. I clowned them for having a coach get fired for gambling. So, in the comparison game here, I'm not quite so sure Georgia's got anything to sort of match on that. But admittedly, I'm jealous of any team that plays in super regionals or anything else. I guess I did make fun of them for losing by 17 runs. So I guess I did do it. So, G. Grace, you are right. I did briefly make fun of Alabama for losing by 17 runs. But I'll acknowledge that it's still been nice to be there. You're right about that. Way the Water says Chaz Chambliss is going to be a problem this year. So interesting prediction there. All right, last comments, and we're going to be gone because it's already 11. Phil Rogers hoping for more success in the other sports. I'd love to see that myself. At DawgNation.com. Yeah, so we got to go for now. Y'all check out us here every day for the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. We'll do longer comments tomorrow. Let me give a big thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews making this all possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for all of that. Then get your air conditioning unit tuned back up. It has actually been a fairly mild summer here thus far, but big hot weather's on the way. So get your AC unit tuned up to be ready to go for that. R.S. Andrews got you covered and all that. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.